When the piercing roar of a dying leopardess shattered the silence of the Tanzanian wilderness, Dr. Elena Vasquez never imagined she would soon become a mother to one of Africa's most dangerous predators. Raising him in her home with baby bottles, lullabies, and a security blanket that would become legendary among wildlife researchers worldwide. The emergency call came through at 3:47 a.m. on a sweltering March night in 2023. Rangers at the Serengeti Wildlife Research Station had discovered a critically injured female leopard caught in an illegal wire snare, her body mangled and torn from desperate attempts to escape. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's lead veterinary surgeon, raced through the darkness in her Land Rover, knowing that every minute could mean the difference between life and death. Elena had spent 12 years in Tanzania, dedicating her life to protecting the country's endangered wildlife. Originally from Barcelona, she had arrived as a young graduate student and never left, drawn by the raw beauty of the Serengeti and the urgent need to save species teetering on the brink of extinction. Her small clinic had become a beacon of hope for injured animals across the region, but nothing had prepared her for what awaited her that night. When she arrived at the scene, the sight was heartbreaking. The magnificent leopardess lay motionless, her breathing shallow and labored. The wire snare had cut deep into her hindquarters, causing severe blood loss and infection. But as Elena examined the animal more closely, she made a shocking discovery that would change everything. The leopardess was heavily pregnant, her swollen belly indicating she was due to give birth within days. Working frantically by flashlight, Elena and her team sedated the dying mother and rushed her back to the clinic. They had perhaps hours to save both lives. The veterinary team worked through the night, administering blood transfusions, antibiotics, and pain medication. But the leopardess's injuries were too severe. As dawn broke over the African savanna, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, the mother's vital signs began to fail. In a desperate final attempt, Elena made the decision to perform an emergency cesarean section. As the leopardess drew her last breath, a tiny, perfectly formed cub entered the world, his eyes still sealed shut, his spotted coat damp and fragile. The newborn weighed barely 500 grams and fit entirely in Elena's cupped hands, mewing softly as he searched instinctively for his mother's warmth and milk that would never come. Elena stared down at the helpless cub in her hands, his tiny body trembling as he cried for a mother who would never answer. At 34 years old, she had saved countless animals, but never had she faced such an impossible situation. Leopard cubs required constant care for their first few months of life, and without their mother's milk and warmth, survival rates in captivity were devastatingly low. The nearest wildlife sanctuary was 400 kilometers away, and the cub was too fragile to survive the journey. Her assistant, Jabari Mwangi, a local Maasai tracker who had worked with Elena for 6 years, watched quietly as she weighed their options. "Doctor," he said softly, "my grandmother used to say that when the earth takes a mother, it provides another path for the child. Perhaps this little one's path leads through you." Jabari had seen Elena's dedication to wounded animals, how she would sleep in the clinic for days, nursing injured zebras back to health, how she had hand-fed an orphaned elephant calf until it was strong enough to join a herd. The research station's director, Dr. James Thornfield, arrived an hour later to assess the situation. A practical man in his 50s who had run wildlife facilities across Africa, he knew the statistics all too well. "Elena, I understand your attachment, but we both know the reality here. Even if we manage to keep him alive for a few weeks, what then? He'll never survive in the wild without learning from his mother, and we don't have the facilities for long-term care of a leopard." But Elena couldn't shake the image of the cub's tiny paws reaching out as she held him, his instinctive search for comfort and security. She had witnessed too many deaths in her years in Tanzania, too many beautiful creatures lost to poachers, disease, and human encroachment. This time, she had arrived just in time to save a life, and she wasn't ready to give up. Against all protocol and professional advice, Elena made a decision that would transform both their lives forever. She would take the cub home to her small cottage on the research station grounds and attempt something that had rarely been tried before, raising a leopard cub as if he were her own child, providing round-the-clock care until he was strong enough to face whatever future awaited him. Elena's cottage, normally a peaceful retreat filled with veterinary journals and African art, transformed overnight into an intensive care nursery. She cleared out her spare bedroom, installing heat lamps, soft blankets, and a makeshift incubator fashioned from a large plastic container lined with towels. The temperature had to remain constant at exactly 32 degrees Celsius, mimicking the warmth the cub would have received from his mother's body. She named him Kesi, which meant born during troubled times in Swahili. The first 72 hours were critical, and Elena barely left his side. Every 2 hours, she fed him a specially formulated milk replacement through a tiny bottle designed for premature kittens. Kesi's eyes were still sealed shut, his ears folded against his head, making him completely dependent on touch and smell to navigate his world. The feeding process was painstakingly slow. Unlike domestic cats, leopard cubs have different nutritional needs and feeding reflexes. Elena had to stimulate Kesi's throat gently to encourage swallowing, often taking 20 minutes for him to consume just a few milliliters of formula. Between feedings, she massaged his tiny belly and helped him eliminate waste, functions his mother would have performed with her rough tongue. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Sleep became a luxury Elena could no longer afford. Her alarm clock rang every 2 hours, day and night, but often she didn't need it. Kesi's plaintive cries would wake her, a sound that tugged at something deep in her maternal instincts she never knew existed. Friends from the research station stopped by with concerned expressions, bringing coffee and urging her to rest, but Elena remained vigilant. Dr. Thornfield visited on the 3rd day, expecting to find either a miracle or a tragedy. Instead, he discovered Elena sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor, cradling Kesi while he fed, her voice soft as she spoke to him in Spanish and English, the same gentle tone she might use with a human baby. The cub had gained 50 grams, a small but significant victory. "You realize what you're committing to," Thornfield said quietly, watching as Kesi's tiny paw wrapped around Elena's finger. "If he survives, you're looking at months, possibly years of care. Leopards aren't pets, Elena. Even hand-raised ones retain their wild instincts." Quote, Elena looked up, exhaustion evident in her eyes but determination unwavering in her voice. "I know exactly what I'm committing to, James. I'm giving him a chance at life." The first month tested every ounce of Elena's endurance and medical expertise. Kesi's feeding schedule remained relentless, but now each session brought new challenges. As he grew stronger, his natural leopard instincts began emerging in unexpected ways. During feeding, he would knead against Elena's arm with his tiny paws, a behavior that would have stimulated his mother's milk production. The pressure of his small claws, even at this early stage, left red marks on her skin. Elena documented everything in meticulous detail, creating what would become an invaluable record for future wildlife rehabilitation efforts. She tracked his weight daily, noting that Kesi was developing more slowly than cubs raised by their mothers, but his progress remained steady. His eyes opened on day 14, revealing brilliant amber irises that seemed to study Elena's face with intense curiosity. The most difficult moments came during Kesi's first illness. In week 3, he developed severe diarrhea and refused to eat, his tiny body becoming dangerously dehydrated. Elena worked frantically, administering subcutaneous fluids and adjusting his formula, sleeping on the floor beside his incubator to monitor his breathing throughout the night. She called veterinary colleagues in Kenya and South Africa, seeking advice from anyone who had experience with hand-raised big cats. During those dark 48 hours, Elena questioned everything. Perhaps Dr. Thornfield had been right about the impossibility of her mission. She watched Kesi's labored breathing and wondered if she was prolonging his suffering rather than saving his life. Jabari found her crying over the motionless cub at 3 a.m., convinced she was losing him. But leopards are survivors by nature, and Kesi proved his heritage. On the 3rd day of his illness, he lifted his head and mewed softly when Elena approached with a bottle. The relief that flooded through her was overwhelming. As he began eating again, she whispered promises to him in Spanish, vowing to fight for his life as fiercely as his mother would have. The breakthrough came when Kesi began showing signs of recognition. His ears would perk up when he heard Elena's voice from another room, and he would make soft, chirping sounds when she entered his sight. Most remarkably, he began following her scent, crawling toward her clothing even when his eyes were closed. Their bond was forming in ways that transcended species barriers. At 6 weeks old, Kesi had transformed from a helpless newborn into an active, curious cub who treated Elena's cottage as his personal playground. His coordination improved dramatically, and he began exploring beyond the confines of his nursery area. Elena would often find him attempting to climb the legs of chairs or investigating the fascinating textures of her Persian rugs with his tiny teeth and claws. The discovery that would define their unique relationship came by pure accident. Elena had been working late one evening, updating research files on her laptop while Kesi napped nearby. When he woke crying, she instinctively reached for one of her old sweaters to comfort him. The moment the soft cashmere touched his fur, Kesi's entire demeanor changed. He stopped crying, nuzzled into the fabric, and began making a deep rumbling sound that Elena recognized as contentment. From that night forward, the navy blue sweater became Kesi's security blanket. He would carry it around the house in his mouth, knead it with his paws, and refuse to sleep without it pressed against his body. Elena found the behavior both endearing and scientifically fascinating. Wild leopard cubs often imprint on their mother's scent, but Kesi had bonded with the smell of her perfume and laundry detergent embedded in the wool. Their daily routine evolved into something resembling a strange form of motherhood. Elena would wake at dawn to find Kesi perched on her windowsill, having learned to climb onto her bed during the night. He would follow her to the kitchen, weaving between her legs as she prepared his morning formula. His appetite had increased dramatically, and he now consumed nearly 200 milliliters per feeding, requiring Elena to order specialized leopard nutrition supplements from suppliers in Nairobi. The cottage's transformation continued as Elena leopard-proofed every room. She secured loose objects, covered electrical outlets, and installed child safety latches on cabinets, after discovering Kesi's remarkable ability to open doors with his paws. Her once pristine home now resembled a cross between a veterinary clinic and a nursery, with feeding stations, climbing posts, and toys scattered throughout. Visitors from the research station began stopping by regularly, drawn by curiosity about Elena's unusual houseguest. Word spread among the international wildlife community about the Spanish veterinarian raising a leopard cub in her home. Some colleagues expressed concern about the precedent she was setting, while others marveled at the detailed behavioral observations she was recording. By 3 months old, Kesi had grown into a 4-kilogram bundle of energy, whose leopard instincts were becoming impossible to ignore. His playful pounces, once adorable and harmless, now carried real force. Elena discovered claw marks on her furniture and found her curtains shredded after Kesi's climbing adventures. More concerning were the moments when his predatory drive would suddenly activate. He would stalk Elena's feet as she walked, crouching low with dilated pupils before launching surprise attacks that, while playful, demonstrated the hunting behaviors hardwired into his DNA. The reality of Kesi's future began weighing heavily on Elena's mind during sleepless nights. Dr. Sarah Kimani, a renowned animal behaviorist from the University of Nairobi, visited the research station specifically to observe Kesi's development. Her assessment was sobering. "Elena, what you've accomplished is remarkable, but we need to discuss the long-term implications. Kesi has imprinted on you as his mother figure, but he's also developing normally in terms of leopard behavior. He's going to need more space, more stimulation, and eventually contact with his own species." The first serious incident occurred during Kesi's 4th month. While Elena was video calling colleagues in Barcelona, showing off Kesi's latest tricks, he suddenly became overstimulated by the electronic sounds from her laptop. In a burst of wild energy, he knocked over a lamp, scattered papers across the room, and accidentally scratched Elena's arm deeply enough to require stitches. The wound wasn't intentional, but it served as a stark reminder of Kesi's growing strength and unpredictable nature. Jabari, who had become Kesi's unofficial uncle, expressed his concerns during their evening walks around the research station grounds. "Doctor, in Maasai culture, we believe every creature has its proper place in the world. Kesi is happy with you, yes, but is this truly where he belongs? Look how he watches the horizon when we walk outside. His eyes follow every bird, every movement in the grass. Part of him yearns for something we cannot give him here." Elena knew Jabari was right, but the thought of separating from Kesi felt like contemplating the loss of her own child. He had become woven into every aspect of her daily life. His absence during her brief trips to town left her anxious and distracted. The cottage felt empty without his presence, without the sound of his contented rumbling or the sight of him dragging his beloved sweater from room to room. The solution came from an unexpected source during a conference call with wildlife sanctuaries across East Africa. Dr. Margaret Ochieng, director of the Masai Mara Leopard Conservation Project, proposed something unprecedented, creating a specialized habitat that could bridge Kesi's dual nature. "What if we don't force him to choose between being wild or domesticated?" she suggested. "What if we create a space where he can be both?" Elena's heart raced as Dr. Ochieng outlined her vision. Using Elena's savings, donations from international wildlife organizations, and a grant from the European Conservation Fund, they could construct a unique 5-acre enclosure adjacent to the research station. The habitat would feature natural elements essential for leopard well-being: towering acacia trees for climbing, rocky outcroppings for territorial marking, and a freshwater stream. But it would also include a specially designed living quarters where Elena could continue their bond safely. Construction began immediately, with Elena personally overseeing every detail. The enclosure's design incorporated her months of observations about Kesi's preferences and behaviors. She insisted on a covered pavilion area with comfortable seating where she could spend time with him, complete with electrical outlets for her laptop so she could work while maintaining their connection. A secure feeding station allowed for continued hand feeding if necessary, while natural prey introduction areas would help Kesi develop hunting skills. The most innovative feature was a climate-controlled den that replicated the security of Elena's cottage. Inside, they placed Kesi's cherished navy sweater, familiar blankets, and even recordings of Elena's voice for comfort during her absences. The den connected to the main enclosure through a system of tunnels that Kesi could navigate freely, giving him choice and control over his environment. During the 6-week construction period, Elena began gradually preparing Kesi for the transition. She introduced him to larger spaces by taking him to a temporary outdoor enclosure during supervised visits. Initially, Kesi clung to her side, overwhelmed by the vastness and unfamiliar scents. But gradually, his curiosity overcame his anxiety. She watched with mixed emotions as he discovered the joy of climbing trees beyond the height of furniture, the satisfaction of marking territory with his scent, and the thrill of stalking insects through tall grass. The day before the move, Elena sat on her cottage floor with Kesi curled against her, his sweater wrapped around both of them. She spoke to him in Spanish about the adventure awaiting them, promising that their bond would endure even as his world expanded beyond the walls that had kept him safe. The morning of the transition, Elena carried Kesi in a specially designed transport crate to his new home, her hands trembling slightly as she unlocked the entrance to the enclosure. Kesi emerged cautiously, his amber eyes wide as he took in the vast expanse before him. For several minutes he remained pressed against Elena's legs, overwhelmed by the symphony of new sounds, scents, and sensations that his confined upbringing had never allowed him to experience. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. What happened next would be etched in Elena's memory forever. Kesi took his first tentative steps onto natural earth, his paws sinking slightly into the soft soil. He froze, looking down in wonder at this new texture, then began kneading the ground with the same motion he had used on his beloved sweater. A gentle breeze carried unfamiliar scents to his sensitive nose, and Elena watched as something ancient awakened within him. Within hours, Kesi was exploring with increasing confidence. He discovered his first tree, a massive baobab that had stood for centuries. His climbing instincts, previously limited to furniture and curtains, exploded into graceful leaps and bounds up the trunk. From the highest branch he could safely reach, Kesi surveyed his new kingdom, his posture regal and wild in ways Elena had never seen before. The most remarkable transformation occurred over the following weeks. Kesi began developing the territorial behaviors essential to leopard survival. He established favorite resting spots on the rocky outcroppings, marked specific trees with his scent, and created mental maps of every corner of his domain. Yet, each evening he would return to the pavilion where Elena waited, settling beside her with his sweater while she documented his daily progress. Their routine found new rhythms. Elena would arrive each morning to find Kesi waiting at the pavilion entrance, ears perked forward in greeting. They would spend hours together as she worked on her research, Kesi often draping himself across nearby rocks or napping in patches of sunlight. When Elena needed to leave for meetings or supply runs, Kesi would retreat to his den with his sweater, emerging only when the familiar sound of her Land Rover announced her return. 6 months into their new arrangement, Elena received a call that would test everything they had built together. A young female leopard, rescued from similar circumstances in Kenya, needed placement. The proposal was extraordinary. Introduce Kesi to his own species while maintaining the unique bond he shared with Elena. Amara arrived on a sweltering Tuesday morning in November, her golden coat marked with the distinctive rosettes that marked her as pure Kenyan mountain leopard. Unlike Kesi, she had spent her first 6 months with her mother before being orphaned by poachers, giving her crucial social development that Kesi had missed. Dr. Kimani accompanied the transport, carrying detailed behavioral notes and warning Elena about the delicate introduction process ahead. The initial meeting took place through the safety of mesh barriers, with both leopards housed in adjacent temporary enclosures. Kesi's reaction was unlike anything Elena had witnessed before. He became instantly alert, pacing the perimeter of his space while making soft vocalizations she had never heard him produce. Amara responded with equally intrigued chirps and calls, her tail twitching as she studied this strange male who carried unfamiliar human scents. Elena spent sleepless nights monitoring their interactions through security cameras she had installed throughout both enclosures. What she observed fascinated her scientific mind while tugging at her heart. Kesi would bring his cherished sweater to the fence line, as if offering to share his most precious possession with the newcomer. Amara, initially wary, began responding to his overtures by lying parallel to the fence, separated by mere inches of wire mesh. The breakthrough came during their second week together. Elena watched through binoculars as both leopards engaged in synchronized behaviors, grooming themselves simultaneously, stretching in unison, and even attempting to play through the barriers. Most remarkably, Amara began imitating some of Kesi's human-influenced behaviors, sitting upright in ways wild leopards rarely adopted, and showing curiosity about Elena's presence rather than fear. When Dr. Ochieng arrived to assess their progress, she was amazed by what she witnessed. "Elena, this is unprecedented. Amara is actually learning social cues from Kesi, while he's discovering natural leopard communication from her. They're teaching each other to be complete leopards in ways we never anticipated." The decision to remove the barriers was made on a calm morning when both leopards were observed lying peacefully at the fence line. Elena's heart pounded as the gates were opened, creating one unified space. For several minutes, neither leopard moved. Then Amara stood gracefully and approached Kesi with confident, measured steps. When they touched noses in the universal feline greeting, Elena felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Kesi had found not just a companion, but a teacher who could show him the leopard heritage his human upbringing had obscured. 2 years later, Elena's research station had become an international destination for wildlife behaviorists studying human-animal bonds. Kesi and Amara had not only formed a strong partnership but had successfully bred, producing 2 healthy cubs that displayed remarkable adaptability. The cubs showed no fear of humans while maintaining strong wild instincts, suggesting that Kesi's unique upbringing had created an entirely new model for leopard conservation. Elena published her findings in the Journal of Wildlife Rehabilitation, documenting how love and dedication could bridge the gap between human care and wild survival. Her detailed observations of Kesi's development became required reading for wildlife veterinarians worldwide. The navy sweater, now faded and worn, remained Kesi's treasured possession, though he shared it generously with Amara and their cubs during Tanzania's cool season. Most evenings, Elena still sat in the pavilion with her laptop, working while Kesi lounged nearby. Now joined by his growing family, these peaceful moments represented something revolutionary in wildlife conservation. Visitors often asked Elena if she ever regretted the sleepless nights, the scratched furniture, or the complete transformation of her quiet life. Her answer never varied. "Kesi taught me that sometimes the most important scientific discoveries come not from textbooks, but from following your heart when a life depends on it." Today, the Serengeti Human-Wildlife Bond Research Center continues Elena's groundbreaking work, helping other orphaned big cats while studying the complex relationships between humans and apex predators. Kesi's story proves that with enough love, patience, and scientific innovation, we can rewrite the rules of what's possible in wildlife conservation. What's the most extraordinary animal rescue story you've ever heard? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible wildlife conservation stories that challenge everything we thought we knew about the bond between humans and the wild creatures we're fighting to protect.